This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into a pretty heavy topic today.
Yeah.
The internment of Japanese citizens during World War II.
It's a fascinating but difficult
Not just in the U.S.,
chapter for sure.
Canada
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
and even Latin America. So we're going to look at why this even happened.
Why?
What was it like in these camps and the impact it had for generations after.
Absolutely.
And there are some twists and turns in this story, believe me.
Surprising how this one event
Yeah.
played out across different countries.
Yeah?
You know, with each
Before the war even started,
contrary.
Japanese communities were thriving across the Americas.
Yeah, but all rooted in this same global conflict.
Right.
And, sadly similar prejudices.
And these weren't just small groups.
No, not at all.
These were established communities really making a difference.
Huge contributions
Yeah.
to their societies.
Especially on the U.S. West Coast.
California, you had a really vibrant Japanese-American population.
Okay.
You had the Issei,
Okay.
the first-generation immigrants.
Right.
And then their American-born children,
Yeah.
the Nisei.
Okay.
And they were deeply involved in so many things.
So
Agriculture, fishing,
not just
businesses. No, they were really integrated
woven into the fabric of
into the fabric of these societies. Absolutely.
But even before the war,
Yeah.
there was discrimination.
Unfortunately.
Well,
Already
there was this undercurrent of
existing tension.
racial prejudice and economic tension.
Yeah.
Some people saw them as a threat,
Even though
even though they were vital to those local economies.
it seems like that underlying tension
Mm-hmm.
plays a huge role in what happened next.
Yeah, it definitely set the stage.
So Pearl Harbor in 41
Mm-hmm.
changes everything.
Right.
How did that impact these Japanese communities
Well, after Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
the fear and suspicion towards anyone,
of Japanese descent just exploded?
like all those prejudices.
All those pre-existing prejudices
Yeah.
were amplified tenfold overnight.
Wow.
Suddenly there were these fears of espionage and sabotage,
Right.
unfounded fears.
And in the U.S., Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066.
Yeah.
And that's when things really took a dark turn.
This is the order that leads to the internment camps, right?
Exactly. Over 120,000 people
Wow.
of Japanese descent were forcibly relocated
Okay.
and imprisoned.
And the shocking part is...
And here's the truly shocking part.
Yeah.
2/3 of them were American citizens.
Wow.
American citizens stripped of their rights,
Just
homes, their lives,
of their ancestry.
based solely on their ancestry.
It's hard to fathom how that's even legal.
Right.
Didn't the Supreme Court actually uphold this?
Yeah, it's a very controversial case.
Yeah.
Korematsu v. United States in 1944.
Right. The Supreme Court ruled that the internment was constitutional.
It just shows how...
It really highlights how wartime hysteria
Yeah.
can override basic human rights,
Yeah.
even in a country
So let's talk about these camps.
that prides itself on freedom and justice.
Places like Manzanar,
Right.
Tule Lake, Topaz,
Topaz,
Heart Mountain.
Heart Mountain.
What were the conditions actually like?
Oh,
with
imagine
saps?
being forced to sell everything you own,
Yeah.
often for pennies on the dollar,
Okay.
and then being shipped off
Right.
to these remote, desolate locations.
I mean, just looking at photos of these camps, it's
Yeah.
clear they weren't designed for comfort.
It's incredibly difficult.
Rows and rows of barracks
Mhm.
surrounded by barbed wire.
It's hard to believe families were forced to call these places home.
Hard to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The conditions inside were just as bad.
Okay.
Overcrowding was a constant issue. Sanitation was poor, healthcare was inadequate.
It just seems impossible that
Families crammed into these tiny spaces
anyone could thrive
with little privacy.
in an environment like that.
Limited access to basic necessities.
And this wasn't just happening in the U.S. Japanese Canadians were also uprooted, stripped of property, sent to camps further inland.
Yeah, and one historian, Roger Daniels,
Okay.
he argued that this wasn't just wartime security. It was fueled by racial discrimination and economic jealousy,
Okay.
particularly from white farmers and businesses
Right.
who saw the Japanese as competition.
Oh,
So his work was groundbreaking.
Even while these communities
Because it challenged that traditional narrative
that were being targeted.
and forced people to confront uncomfortable reality of racial prejudice influencing wartime policy.
There's another story unfolding, a story of loyalty and courage.
Yeah.
You're talking about the Japanese American
That's right.
who served in the U.S. military.
Despite facing blatant discrimination,
During the war.
33,000 Nisei volunteered.
It just seems unbelievable that they would be willing to
serve in the U.S. military.
fight for a country that was treating them like enemies.
It speaks volumes about their character and their unwavering belief in those American ideals that were being denied to them back home.
So,
And their service wasn't just symbolic.
the service wasn't
It was impactful.
symbolic.
You know, take the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, for example.
Okay.
This unit, composed entirely of Japanese Americans, became one of the most decorated units in U.S. military history.
Okay.
They fought with incredible bravery and distinction in Europe, earning countless medals and honors.
On one hand, you have the government
The Nationalist School of History
locking up innocent people.
often points to the 442nd Service
That's on their ancestry.
as proof that patriotism can transcend racial boundaries.
Right.
And they use this example to challenge
One and the other.
the government's discriminatory policies.
You have these same people proving their loyalty on the battlefield.
Yeah.
It's just a stark contrast.
It really makes you question
That really makes you think.
how deep-seated prejudice can blind us
Yeah, about the complexities of this period.
to the true character of individuals. The service of these Japanese American soldiers is just incredible.
It's inspiring.
Right.
But even after the war,
It really is.
the fight wasn't over for these families, right?
Right. The fight for justice and recognition
What happened to them?
continued long after the war.
Once they were released
Many Japanese Americans returned to their former homes,
from the camps.
only to find their property gone, businesses ruined, communities shattered.
It's hard to imagine.
They had to rebuild their lives from scratch,
Picking up the pieces
carrying the scars of trauma and displacement.
after something like that.
Yeah, and the psychological toll was immense.
It wasn't just about
You know, imagine that constant fear,
rebuilding homes and businesses.
the uncertainty,
It was about
the feeling of being betrayed by your own country.
rebuilding lives and communities
Many internees, even after they were released,
that have been torn apart.
struggled with trauma depression,
There's so many personal stories
a sense of
in
displacement.
this period.
You know, they lost their homes,
It's that really bring the human cost of this policy
their communities, their sense of belonging.
into focus. I was reading about George Takei,
Yeah.
the actor who played Sulu
George Takei's story
in Star Trek.
is a powerful reminder that this wasn't
He and his family were interned
just some abstract historical event.
at Rower and Two Lake
It was a lived reality
when he was just a kid.
for thousands of innocent children
He talks about how his family
were robbed of their childhood.
lost their home, their business,
Yeah.
everything. And he was too young to even understand
Incredibly moving.
what was happening or why they were being
And it wasn't just this physical hardship.
treated like criminals.
You know, the psychological scars ran deep.
Reading those accounts,
Many internees.
you really get a sense of the
Even after they were released,
fear and confusion he must have experienced.
struggled with trauma
It's incredibly moving.
and a sense of displacement.
It's like their government was trying to erase their very existence, to deny them their rightful place in society.
One of the most striking quotes I came across
One of the most striking quotes I came across
was from Mary Tsukamoto,
who was intern
who was interned at Jerome
at the Jerome War Relocation Center
War Relocation Center in Arkansas.
in Arkansas.
She said,
I
I was born in this country.
was born in this country.
I'd never even been to Japan,
I had never even been to Japan.
but I was suddenly an enemy alien.
But I was suddenly an enemy alien.
It just shows
It just shows how absurd.
how absurd the whole situation was. The whole situation was.
They were judged.
They were judged solely on their race,
Solely on their race.
not their actions or their beliefs.
Not their actions or beliefs.
It was a classic example of guilt by association.
And remember, this wasn't just confined to the U.S.
It's a dangerous precedent that undermines
Japanese Canadian
the very foundations of a just and equitable society.
also endured similar hardships
And it's important to understand
and ignominies.
that the internment experience wasn't uniform.
Many were sent to remote work camps,
There were variations in the conditions
separated from their families.
of the locations, the levels of hardship
forced to live in harsh conditions
faced by different communities.
It's a reminder that even within this larger historical event,
Right.
there are countless individual stories
It's a reminder
that deserve to be heard and understood.
even within this larger historical event,
But amidst all this darkness,
there are countless individual stories
there are also stories
that deserve to be heard and understood.
of incredible resilience and courage.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Despite the injustice.
Take the story of the 442nd
Many Japanese Americans and Japanese Canadians
Regimental Combat Team.
chose a path of remarkable courage and patriotism.
These soldiers,
Take the story of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team.
facing discrimination back home,
These soldiers, facing discrimination and prejudice back home,
went on to become
one of
the most decorated units
one of the decorated units
in U.S. military history.
in U.S. military history.
They were literally fighting two battles.
Right.
One against the enemy overseas.
They were literally fighting two battles.
And one against the prejudice.
One against the enemy overseas.
And discrimination they faced at home.
One against prejudice and discrimination back home.
It's such a powerful testament
Yeah.
to the human spirit's ability
It's just such a powerful testament
to overcome adversity.
to the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity.
And their sacrifice wasn't just about
Exactly. And their sacrifice wasn't just about
proving their loyalty.
proving their loyalty. It was about paving the way
It was about
for future generations.
paving the way for future generations.
Fighting for a more just and inclusive America.
Fighting for a more
Their story is a beacon of hope.
just and inclusive America.
A reminder that even in the face of injustice,
It's a beacon of hope.
the human spirit can prevail.
A reminder that
Yeah.
even in the face of injustice,
And it wasn't just the soldiers.
the human spirit can prevail.
There were countless acts of everyday heroism
And it wasn't just the soldiers.
within the camp.
There were countless acts of everyday heroism
People coming together to support each other.
within the town.
Creating schools, libraries.
People came together to support each other.
Organizing cultural events.
Creating schools,
And
libraries,
preserving their traditions.
organizing cultural events.
Yeah, you can really see
And preserving their traditions.
resilience, their determination.
It's amazing how even in such
To make the best of a terrible situation,
a restrictive and oppressive environment,
they understood that their stories mattered,
they found ways
that they had a right to be heard.
to maintain their dignity.
A great example of this is the group of internees at Manzanar,
And their sense of community.
who started a newspaper
Those stories are a real testament
called the Manzanar Free Press.
to the strength of the human spirit.
They used it to report on camp life,
It reminds us that
share stories, and advocate for their rights.
even in the darkest of times,
Mm.
people can find ways to connect,
Those stories are a real testament
create, and resist.
to the strength of the human spirit.
And their stories continue to resonate today,
You know, it reminds us that
reminding us of the importance
even in the darkest of
of
times,
standing up for what's right,
people can find ways to connect,
even when it's difficult.
create, and resist.
So what happened after the war?
Mhm.
How did these communities begin
So what happened after the war?
to rebuild their lives?
Well, the road to recovery was long and arduous.
Wow.
Many Japanese Americans
It
to their former homes,
was long and arduous.
only to find their property had been sold.
Many Japanese Americans
Their business is gone. Their communities changed.
returned to their former homes
They had to start over.
only to find that their property was gone. So they were essentially punished twice.
Their business is gone. Their communities changed.
Once for their ancestry,
They had to start over.
and then again for having been interned.
Facing discrimination and prejudice
It's
in the job market and in housing.
tragic reality.
So it's tragic reality.
They lost years of their lives.
They lost years of their lives, their livelihoods,
Their livelihoods, their sense of
their
security.
sense of security.
And now they had to rebuild their lives
And now they had to rebuild their lives
in a society that still viewed them with suspicion.
in a society that still viewed them with suspicion.
But they did rebuild.
But they did rebuild.
Yeah.
They did slowly but surely.
They found a way to move forward.
They pieced their lives back together,
They did.
drawing strength from their communities, their families,
Slowly but surely.
and their unwavering determination.
They pieced their lives back together.
They started new businesses,
Drawing strength from their communities. It's a testament to their resilience
reestablished their cultural institutions,
and their unwavering belief in a better future.
and fought for their civil rights.
Absolutely.
It's a testament to their resilience
And eventually,
and their unwavering belief in a better future.
their struggle for justice began to bear fruit.
Absolutely. And eventually, their struggle for justice began to bear fruit.
But in 1988,
it took decades, but in
the
1988,
U.S. government formally apologized.
The U.S. government formally apologized
for the internment. And offered reparations to surviving internees. It was a long overdue acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done.
You're absolutely right.
Though I imagine no amount of money.
But it was an important step
towards
healing and reconciliation.
For the suffering they endured.
And it wasn't just the U.S.
You're absolutely right.
Canada also issued a formal apology.
But it was an important step.
And offered compensation
in reconciliation.
to Japanese Canadians in the same year.
And it wasn't just the U.S. Canada also issued a formal apology and offered compensation to Japanese Canadians in the same year.
So while the scars of internment remain, there's also a sense of hope.
There's also a sense of hope.
A sense that justice, however delayed,
can
eventually prevail.
However delayed, can eventually prevail.
That's a powerful message.
That's a powerful message, not just for those
who are directly affected by these events.
Directly affected.
But for all of us.
By these events, but for all of us.
It reminds us that we have a responsibility. To learn from the mistakes of the past. To stand up for what's right.
And to fight for a more
just and equitable society.
It's
It's about acknowledging the wrongs of the past and working to ensure they're never repeated.
about acknowledging the wrongs of the past.
But this event wasn't just
And working to ensure they're never repeated.
a singular moment in history, was it?
But this event
It has connections to larger trends
wasn't just a singular moment in history, was it?
and historical forces.
It has connections to larger trends.
Can you talk a bit about
In historical forces?
the broader historical context?
The internment of Japanese citizens
Surrounding
wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern
There was already this underlying current of xenophobia.
of prejudice and discrimination against Asian immigrants.
Even before the war, that had been brewing for decades.
Exactly.
In the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
You probably remember learning about
The U.S. saw a wave of immigration from Asia,
the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 in school.
particularly from China and Japan.
That was the first law.
And this influx of immigrants triggered a backlash
In the U.S.
fueled by economic anxieties and racial stereotypes.
to specifically restrict immigration
Yeah.
based on race or nationality.
So you had
It's a stark reminder of how easily fear
the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882.
and prejudice can be codified into law.
That was the first law in the U.S.
And this anti-Asian sentiment
to specifically restrict immigration based on race or nationality.
didn't just disappear.
It's a stark reminder of how
It
easily
continued to simmer beneath the surface.
fear and prejudice can be codified into law.
And events like Pearl Harbor just ignited it.
And this anti-Asian sentiment didn't just disappear.
So
It continued to simmer beneath the surface.
The wartime hysteria just amplified
And events like Pearl Harbor just ignited it.
those existing prejudices.
Precisely. Suddenly, anyone of Japanese descent
Suddenly, anyone of Japanese descent was seen
as a potential enemy,
as a potential enemy.
regardless of their citizenship or loyalty.
And regardless of their citizenship or their loyalty,
Right.
it's a classic example of scapegoating.
It's a classic example of scapegoating.
Of blaming an entire group of people
Blaming an entire group of people for the actions of a few.
for the actions of a few.
And sadly, we see echoes of those same patterns.
And sadly, we see echoes
Even
of
today.
those same patterns.
Think about the rise of Islamophobia after 9/11,
Think about the rise
or the recent surge in anti-Asian hate crimes
of Islamophobia after 9/11,
during the COVID-19 pandemic.
or the recent surge
It's a reminder
in anti-Asian hate crimes during the COVID-19 pandemic.
that while we've made progress,
It's a reminder
the fight against prejudice and discrimination
that while we've made progress,
is far from over.
the fight against prejudice
We have a responsibility to remain vigilant
and discrimination is far from over.
and to challenge these dangerous ideologies.
We have a responsibility to remain vigilant
Mm.
whenever they emerge.
And to challenge these dangerous ideologies
Yeah.
whenever they emerge.
Sobering thought.
It's a sobering thought.
How easily fear and prejudice can take root.
How easily fear and prejudice can take root.
How difficult it can be to eradicate them.
And how difficult it could be to eradicate them. Yeah, it really makes you think, about how we as a society can learn from these historical mistakes and prevent them from happening again.
The internment of Japanese citizens is just such a stark warning about how fragile human rights are.
It is.
And how important it is to safeguard them.
Especially during times of crisis.
Especially during times of crisis.
You know, it's a reminder that we must always be vigilant.
It's a reminder that we must always be vigilant in defending the rights of all individuals.
In defending the rights of all individuals.
Regardless of their race.
Regardless of their race, ethnicity.
Or their national origin.
Or their national origin, absolutely.
It's about recognizing that our freedoms are interconnected.
They are.
An attack on one group's rights
interconnected
is an attack on everyone's rights.
It is an attack on everyone's rights.
If we allow fear and prejudice to dictate our actions,
we risk undermining the very foundations.
We risk undermining the very foundation
of a just and equitable society. So looking back at this period in history, what are some key takeaways we can apply to our lives today?
Key takeaways we can apply to our lives today.
Well, one crucial takeaway is the importance of critical thinking. You know, we must be able to question assumptions, challenge stereotypes, and evaluate information from diverse sources.
It's about not letting fear and misinformation cloud our judgment.
Right. It's about being informed citizens.
Who
can make decisions based on facts and evidence.
Making decisions based on facts and evidence.
Not on prejudice or unfounded fears.
Not on prejudice.
Or unfounded fears.
Another important lesson is the power of empathy and understanding.
Empathy and understanding.
We need to make an effort to understand different perspectives, to listen to the experiences of others.
Listening to those stories.
And to challenge our own biases. And challenge our own biases.
It's about building bridges between communities, fostering dialogue, and promoting understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And education plays a vital role in this process.
Education plays a vital role.
By learning about historical injustices, like the internment,
in this process.
By hearing the stories of those who endured it, we can gain a deeper understanding.
Right. We can gain a deeper understanding.
And of the consequences of prejudice and discrimination.
What are the consequences of prejudice and discrimination? We need to make sure that these stories are taught in schools.
Absolutely.
That future generations understand the mistakes of the past and are equipped to prevent them from happening again.
And remember, the fight for justice and equality.
The fight for justice and equality is an ongoing process.
It
requires constant vigilance. A willingness to challenge injustice. And a commitment to building a more inclusive and equitable society. This deep dive has been an incredible journey.
Yeah, it has.
Through a truly complex and challenging period in history.
It really has.
It's a reminder of the human capacity for both.
It's a reminder.
Great compassion and great cruelty.
Of the human capacity.
But it's also a testament to the resilience.
For both great compassion and great cruelty.
And the human spirit.
It's also a testament.
And the enduring power of hope and justice.
To the resilience of the human spirit.
We can all learn.
And the enduring power of hope and justice.
From the experiences of those.
We can all learn from the experiences of those.
Who endured the internment.
And
we can all contribute.
To creating a future.
Where such injustices.
Are never repeated.
Well said.
Well said.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
We hope you've gained new insight.
On this deep dive.
Into this important chapter of history.
I hope you've gained new insights into this important chapter.
History isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the present.
Remember, history isn't just about the past.
And shaping a future.
It's about understanding the present and shaping the future.
Where the mistakes of yesterday.
Are not repeated tomorrow.
Keep
exploring, keep learning, and keep asking questions.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.